Good evening, everyone, to this first session under the Vijay Bhumi E-Colloquium on Law and Economics. Under this series, we will be deliberating issues at the intersection of law and economics, which inform legal and administrative proceedings in various walks of life. But today, before I welcome my guests of this evening, I must compliment this gathering of 100 plus brave hearts who have come together to discuss a topic like market delineation in digital markets. That's something commendable, and my compliments to all of you. I now turn your attention to the first guest, the presenter of this topic this evening. Professor Victoria Robertson is an associate professor at the University of Graz, where she teaches EU competition law, comparative competition law, and commercial law. Starting September 2020, she will be holding the chair in commercial law and digitalization at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. She has a doctorate from the Graz University and a master's degree from Oxford University. She has been a researcher at the Max Planck Institute, the College of Europe, the European University Institute, Stanford University, FGV Rio Law School, and Oxford University's Center for Competition Law and Policy. Her current research focuses on market definition in digital market environments and excessive data collection through online platforms as an abuse of dominance. In fact, I recently saw your working paper on that, Vicky. Welcome aboard, Vicky. Let me present all of you the first discussant of the topic today, Mr. Manas Chaudhary. He is a very well-known competition lawyer in India and abroad. He advises Indian and overseas clients on competition law and policy. I have known Manas for more than a decade now as a competition lawyer. I know that he has been civil judge in the West Bengal State Judicial Service. And prior to that, he has been also engaged with the MRTPC, the earlier avatar of Competition Commission, and then thereafter with the Competition Commission. And then he has been having a very successful competition practice. And you can see him in almost all major competition law events, whether in IPBA Vancouver or Auckland or Manila or ICN or BRICS Competition Law Conference. Everywhere you can meet him and interact, and he is there to express his views. And most recently, Manas has co-authored an article entitled The Genesis and Ailments of Cartel Regime in India, a critical analysis, which has been published in Indian Law Review. If I can put it, I know I'm slightly biased, but I can say, Manas, that you are a walking encyclopedia of competition law in India. You have seen the law growing in this country. Can I ask you a general question? In the meantime, Vicky adjusts her audio setting.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so let me get back to Vicky first because I introduced you first. So what is your association with the whole philosophy of competition? To me, it is a very, very enlightening thing. But what does it mean to you, Vicky?
So obviously, as a competition law researcher, competition law is what I do. It's really the air that I breathe, and that's why I thought that the last colloquium we had with Ariel Ezrahi and Maurice Stuckey was so refreshing to actually see a different perspective. I think that's very important.
Right. Manas, you have been faithfully wedded to competition law, competition thoughts. What is the attraction?
Navneet, first and foremost thing is that I joined this practice or started this practice by default. So in fact, it was emerging concept in 1999, 2000. That is the time, I just been roped into the entire concept of introduction of the Competition Act. And it was so fascinating that one tends to know the industry so well. Once you are a practicing lawyer or an economist of competition, you would tend to know how difficult it is to run a business and how difficult it is to meet the challenges of a Competition Act when a regulator is empowered with terrific legislative powers to implement and enforce the competition law. It's a very difficult balance, and a professional who has to strike it for his client, and also before the regulator, on the ground that the regulator is also controlled by the enactment which has been passed by the parliament. It's a very challenging and a fascinating journey, but at the same time, it's wonderful to know how businesses run and how do you really make the business profitable without harming the stakeholders, including the consumer. That's my take about the subject.
So the enigma of business is what has kept you attracted to competition law. Well said, Manas. And my second discussant for the topic today, Dr. Vikas Kathuria, is the Senior Research Fellow at Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition in Munich. He earned his PhD degree at the Tilburg Law and Economic Center, the TILEC, in Netherlands. His PhD thesis investigated the role of competition law in fostering innovation in emerging markets. Vikas has previously worked with the Competition Commission of India and has also taught at the Jindal Global Law School. Vikas, if I can ask you a question to begin our conversation, what drew you to the field of competition?
Well, as it happened with Mr. Chaudhary, it was just coincident. It was a coincidence. I wanted to work on international trade, but I just happened to work on competition law. And why I stayed on, because it's amazing. It's amazing in the sense that it is counterintuitive, as all economic laws are. You come up with a different answer every time when you apply economics. So for me, competition law is a gateway into the realm of law and economics. And that's why I love it so much.
All right. That's fair enough. To now introduce the subject, as all of you know, digital platforms play a central role as facilitators of online interactions and transactions between users. In the current market context, digital delivery of goods and services has already assumed great significance. Therefore, this deliberation today on an important methodological struggle in assessing market power. This equilibrium today will discuss digital platform as an instance in which market definition encounters a number of important challenges. The discussion has gained significance in the wake of recent announcements. If you have taken a note of starting from the EU Vice Presidency on Competition, the DG Comp, the US FTC, India CCI, and several other competition authorities have announced a review of the digital space. Competition authorities and courts are increasingly concerned also with merger and abuse cases that involve digital platforms. I'm just trying to give you a general state of the play. In today's discussion, we will try to engage with important questions as to how to define markets and how to assess market power while dealing with two-sided platforms. We shall also try to touch issues like multi-markets approach versus two-sided markets approach, the recognition of the zero-price markets, the relevance of homing decision of users, and the utmost importance of assessment of entry barriers in today's discussion. We will try to see that how best we can utilize the next hour very, very meaningfully. But let me start this session, let me start the discussion today by inviting Professor Robertson to talk about her recent book, Competition Laws Innovation Factor. To me, it looks like a Bollywood movie title. Nevertheless, Vicky, I invite you to explore, what are the important challenges or controversies from the comparative legal perspective, taking into account both EU and US antitrust laws, which you have found out and has captured in your book. Over to you, Vicky.
So thank you very much. I hope you can see and hear me now.
Yes.
Great. So it's really great to be here at today's eColloquium. Thank you so much to Navneet for inviting me. Thank you to Vikas and to Manas for agreeing to contribute their input. What I want to do today is look at how we can define relevant markets in our digital times. And as Navneet already pointed out, I thereby rely on the book that I recently published with Hart Publishing Oxford. I want to start with a brief look at our current European framework for market definition. And as Navneet also said, in my book, I deal with US antitrust law in detail as well. So if you're interested in that, then go and have a look in the book. So 10 years ago, Louis Kapleau wrote a very influential article called Why Ever Define Markets? And the answer, I believe, is quite simple. We need the relevant market as a frame of reference for our entire antitrust analysis. And I'd like to show that to you by looking at the functions that the relevant market has in EU competition law. And there's two of those functions. The first is what I call the market power function. And the second is what I refer to as the market characterization function. So for the market power function, let's start by looking at Article 101 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. This article prohibits anti-competitive agreements, for example, price cartels. And here the European Commission has issued binding block exemption regulations that have market share thresholds. And for certain types of agreements, they're block exempted if they don't go beyond the market share. And the underlying assumption, of course, is that this indicates a lack of market power. The European Commission also issued a lot of non-binding guidance, like the de minimis notice, and those also have market share thresholds. Then we have Article 102 of the treaty, which tells companies with market power that they may not abuse their market position through certain types of anti-competitive behavior. And here the Court of Justice has established the so-called AXO presumption that a company is dominant within the meaning of Article 102 from a 50% market share. So again, market shares. And we also have the merger regulation, which checks whether a merger between companies may lead to the creation or strengthening of market power. And that's the same kind of market power that we look at under Article 102. And for instance, we have guidelines on horizontal mergers that also like to calculate concentration levels, for which you also need market shares. So that's the market power function. Now, the second function is what I call the market characterization function. And here, the Court of Justice has for a long time told us that under Article 101, we need to appraise agreements in their economic and legal context. And we also need to know about the market to assess an individual exemption. Under Article 102, but also under the merger regulation, context is equally important to either understand an abuse or to understand how competition is working in a certain market, either where there's dominance established or where there's some being created, or even if not, under the merger regulation. So that's the state of play. What is the current EU framework for market definition? So here I just refer to some rather old cases as well, where the Court of Justice has told us in Continental Can that the definition of the relevant market is of essential significance. It said we can only judge the possibilities of competition with reference to a relevant market. And of course, it referred to demand and supply interchangeability. Now, the European Commission in 1997 issued its market definition notice, where it tried to summarize the case law, but also added its own interpretation of what a relevant market is. Now, in general, both the court and the commission, they rely on supply and demand side substitution to define markets. And the notice operationalizes that through the SNP test. Now, one issue is that market definition in those cases and how it developed was really modeled on traditional static markets that are characterized by incremental innovation, if any. So let's now turn to what we're here to discuss, the digital markets. What are the characteristics of those digital markets that challenge traditional market definition? And this list of characteristics, of course, does not apply to all digital markets. So it is a stylized view of a product market that could relate to e-commerce or online advertising, internet search, social networks, the collection and use of big data, and so on. And of course, that includes the GAFAM, which is why they're on the slide here. But it's so much broader than that. So what are the features of the digital market? The digital market is very often fast moving. There are short product cycles. And so market boundaries need to be questioned on an ongoing basis. Those markets are often also innovative and dynamic, or what we could also call Schumpeterian after the Austrian economist Josef Schumpeter. So there's not only incremental, but actually radical innovation that overthrows old market orders. And that also leads to inherent uncertainty in those markets. What are the features of the digital product? Products in digital markets are often differentiated, and they have constantly evolving functionalities, which makes it difficult to establish what interchangeability might be sufficient for market definition purposes. We also witness something that's like a seamless integration of technology and of markets. So more and more products actually become interoperable, and that can soften the boundaries of the markets. Now, finally, let's look at the dynamics of competition in those digital markets. We often have multi-sided platforms, as Natalie already pointed out in the beginning of the talk. They're very present in digital markets, but of course, we know this phenomenon of platforms from other areas like credit cards or newspapers that are partially financed through ads, but the digital realm really takes multi-sidedness to a new level. Then we have direct and indirect network effects. For instance, if there's more of my friends on a certain platform, a social media platform, then I want to be there too. Those are the direct network effects. But the more users like me and my friends are on a platform, the more advertisers are also interested in being on the platform as advertisers. Those are the indirect network effects. This can lead to a lock-in of users, but it also means that those markets might be prone to tipping, so that the demand concentrates on one platform, then the market tips, and once it has, it's very hard to do anything about the cemented market power. And finally, user data. User data plays an important role for the business models of many digital platforms. And here it's really crucial to underline that lots of this data is very versatile, can be used in very many different ways by one and the same platform. So this is to set the scene. Last December, Margrethe Vestager, the Vice President of the European Commission and Commissioner for Competition, announced that after 23 years, the Commission will now review the market definition notice. And she said, market definition continues to be the first step in competition cases, but we have to rethink it, review it against the background of digital markets. So I believe this is a really important task ahead of the European Commission. And what I'd like to look at in the following is what the Commission will need to look out for in this endeavor. So what I've done is I've compiled this roadmap of issues that we need to consider when we want to review the market definition notice. What issues am I talking about? For instance, what is the product in digital markets? These markets are so nuanced, it can be difficult to actually gauge this important point of departure for market definition. Then are zero price markets actual markets? Or how can we take into account a market's multi-sidedness? Also connected to those platforms, what is the role of ecosystems in market definition? How should we deal with the fast-moving nature of those markets if they overthrow old market definitions? What do we do with integrated markets that are interoperable? And of course, are online and offline markets part of the same relevant market? So what I do in my book is that I look at every single one of these issues and several more in detail from a comparative EU-US perspective. But of course, I don't want to go much beyond my allocated time today. So what I'll do in the following is look at two of those aspects that I find particularly important. The question of what constitutes the digital product and the question of multi-sidedness, which of course is closely linked to the first question. So the product is the first step in market definition. We need to find an initial product on which to base our market definition exercise. And in digital markets, we sometimes have a problem to locate what the product might be. And I've brought some examples of that. So many digital business models are based on monetizing user data, meaning that a content provider offers services against the payment of user data and attention. What is the relevant market in such a scenario? Is it the user data? Is it the attention? Is it the advertising? Or is it the whole platform as a system? The Commission has dealt with several cases in this area. And as we saw in Google Shopping, it delineated several markets, that for advertising, that for search, but we don't yet have a coherent approach. Then we also know freemium models like YouTube Premium or Spotify Premium, where a user can choose whether he or she wants to pay with the data and attention, or with money. And that shows two things, I think. First of all, that free services, of course, are not actually free, but also it raises the question whether there's a different market for the streaming service depending on whether it is ad-based or based on user payment. Now, digital assistants are, of course, another instance of such digital products. Digital assistants are, you see one here, Amazon's Echo. Those are voice-controlled little helpers that carry out tasks like reading you the news or telling you the weather forecast or buying items that you ask them to buy. So basically, it's software that can be plugged into smartphones or tablets or desktops or those little Echoes that Amazon has. And this software is increasingly taking charge. In fact, digital assistants may entirely shut out competing offers, depending on what data they use when they answer our queries, or also which partners have bought their way into the system. So for my book, I carried out a little empirical research. In June 2017, I took my phone and I said, Siri, get me the book Virtual Competition by Ariel Ezrahi and Maurice Stuckey. And Siri said, okay, here's iBooks, and it opened that Apple app. And I said, well, Siri, I would like a paper copy of that book. And Siri said, sorry, I don't know what that means. If you like, I can search the web for I want a paper copy of that book. So in that case, you see that the digital has simply shut out the world of actual books, and that really narrows the relevant product market with all the consequences that this entails. And I have to say, I tried this again recently, and Siri no longer does that. So they have learned from the past. So from digital assistants, let's move on to something that's even more connected, the Internet of Things. And you see a representation here, this combination of hardware, data analytics, algorithms, and services. A possible application, just to give you an example, for instance, you have a smart home system. Your radiator is connected to that. The radiator is leaking. Now, the software detects that and might send a plumber on the way without the owner's doing. And the question is, which plumber does it send? Is this a case of aftermarket or a case of tying? So here, this really goes to show that this digital technology can lead to a seamless integration of markets, but at the same time, it can lead to extremely narrow product markets, again, with all the antitrust consequences that this entails. Another brief example, I don't want to be too long in time, is the sharing economy, which of course is not about sharing and caring anymore, but which has seen a rapid professionalization. And here a possible question would be, Uber, the service, is it a service provider or a technology service provider? Is it a transportation provider? What market is it active in? And this has consequences not only for its license to operate, for the employment status of Uber drivers, but also, of course, for the relevant market that competition law can look into. And here the markets might not be the same, so it might depend on which area of the law you look at. So the question really has to be, how can the relevant market remain a useful tool in digital markets as I've sketched them just now? This is a really complex market environment, and that makes it very difficult to establish the clear market boundaries that we in competition law traditionally want to see. And as I've shown, often it's even challenging to make out the initial product that we should start market definition with. Now, thanks to digital assistants and the IoT, the question of demand and supply side substitutability takes on an entirely new dimension. And the result could be very narrow product markets. And we also see that in digital markets, traditional market definition does not provide us with the clear results we would like to see. And that, linking back to the functions of market definition that I talked about before, might mean that the market power function cannot work as we are used to in digital markets. And that is something that the General Court in the European Union has actually acknowledged in a case called Cisco Systems, where it acknowledged and agreed with the Commission that in that very case, high market shares were not indicative of market power because it was a very fast-moving digital market that it was considering. However, we say, so there's a second function of market definition. And here we can say that this second function is more important than ever in the digital context, because we need to understand the market. We need to understand who competes with whom and what dynamics of competition there are, because this directly links to the kind of abusive or anti-competitive behavior in those markets. So the questions that I've pondered when talking about the digital product, they naturally lead to the next issue, and that's the one of multi-sided platforms. And you have a representation of one rather famous digital platform on the slide, which is Facebook. And you can see how the platform brings together market sides, at least two, but in the case of Facebook, it's more. And those market sides share a link that makes it impossible to consider the one market side without also considering the other. That's what economics tells us. So in Europe and also in the United States, the Court of Justice in the EU and the US Supreme Court, they've both dealt with two-sided markets, but in credit card systems. So in the famous case Ohio and American Express, the US Supreme Court held in June 2018 that a transactional platform like the one at issue was one comprehensive relevant product market, encompassing both cardholders and merchants. And it also hinted at the possibility that that might be different for non-transactional platforms. So that was a very tight 5-4 majority in that case. So it's still a controversial question. And we may hear, maybe we will hear more about this case from Vikas. The European Court has dealt with two-sided markets in carte bancaire, but this court focused on one of the market sides as the relevant market, namely the market for the issue of payment cards. The European Commission has increasingly gained experience with such platform markets. It dealt with online search in Google Shopping, with operating systems and app stores in Google Android, and with social media platforms in Facebook, WhatsApp, and also in Microsoft LinkedIn. But the Commission never quite applied two-sided market theory, often only mentioned two-sidedness in passing without actually taking into consideration the effects on the relevant market. So here the question really needs to be, how can we establish the relevant market in a multi-sided platform? And it's far from clear how this can be done. Many scholars have provided possible solutions. Competition authorities and courts, of course, they work with that question every day. A very pragmatic approach came from the English High Court in the Street Map and Google case in 2016, where the English High Court discussed the business model of general search and online maps and also multi-sidedness, and then said, well, they are separate markets. They are also interconnected, so we cannot and we don't need to delineate them precisely. But of course, such pragmatism will not work in all cases. I think for now we can say, definitely if there's a free service provided against data, that does not mean that there's no market. Instead, there will be a market. But let's start our market definition from the revenue generating side without dissociating it from the other market sides. That will mean that the assessment of market power is difficult because market share thresholds and price-based analytical tools will often not be fruitful in this type of market. So what I find in my book is that the role of the platform, of the intermediary, is often underestimated in discussions about multi-sided markets. And here a possibility would be to rely on the way that we delineate aftermarkets and apply these insights that we have to platform markets. So we acknowledge that if there's no competition amongst platforms, then the market sides will not be competitive either. So what is the road ahead of us? First of all, as a competition lawyer, I think the review of the market definition notice is something to look forward to. I think the question here will really be, can the functions of the relevant market stay the same in digital markets? And I think the answer has to be no. So in digital markets, we need to change our approach to market definition, but we also need to change how we rely on this tool. I do believe that market definition can be a useful tool in cases that revolve around digital markets, especially when we talk about market characterization, because it provides a really important background to the theory of harm and a narrative for the case. So after this brief look inside my book, I'm very much looking forward to some insights from my colleagues into digital market definition from India and to the discussion that will follow. So now I would like to hand it back to Navneet.
Thank you, Vicky. I think that was a very crisp yet comprehensive overview of the topic which you have covered in your book, Competition Laws, Innovation Factor. And there is a subtitle which makes it even more interesting, the relevant market in dynamic contexts in the EU and the US. But before I invite Manas, I have to ask you, what does the HSE stand for?
So those are my middle names.
Right, that's what I guessed, but a lot of people have asked me, so therefore I have to ask this question. And to the three panelists, let me, and to the people who have joined us late. It's so heartwarming that there are about 151 people who have joined us by now, and I am in conversation with Victoria Robertson of the University of Graz, Mr. Manas Chaudhary, a senior partner in Khaitan and Company, Dr. Vikas Kathuria, a senior research fellow at the Max Planck in Munich. So let me take the conversation ahead and invite Manas. Manas, you have tracked this issue during the last 5 years, particularly last 5 years, when we have discussed this issue almost at every forum, from ICN to OECD to ABA to, there's hardly a forum which this issue has not been deliberated. You have kept an eye on the Indian competition law space. You are an active participant in that space. Please help us make sense of where we are heading, and what are the difficulties which we have grappled with, and what are the difficulties which continue to challenge us. Over to you, Manas.
Thank you, Navneet. The first and the foremost issue which I would like to share with the participant as well as my co-speakers and panelists, that the Indian Competition Act typically does not talk about any threshold of market share either in anti-competitive agreements or in case of abuse of dominance or merger control. The reason for that is very simple. When this law was being enacted in the year 2002 and ultimately got the assent of the president in January 2003, the most important stakeholder, that is the industry, they were not very keen to have a market share threshold to be the deciding factor for the CCI to commence investigation, because India is at that stage was a very nascent, economically liberated regime in India, because it was 1991 that we have had the economic liberalization announced, and the law came into being in 2003. So naturally, the threshold for a market share was never thought to be the trigger for initiating any investigation relating to vertical restraints or abuse of dominance, or for that matter, even merger control. So the law was enacted in such a manner that market share does form a very important part to understand market power or market dominance, yet it has to be understood in terms of other factors provided by the legislator while defining market power. However, having said that, it has always been the starting point for the CCI. So far, what we have experienced in our 10, 11 years of practice in this space, that market share continues to be the easiest and the most effective qualitative evidence for any antitrust authority, and so is the CCI. So if I recall, I remember in the year 2015, there was an allegation made by some user of computer software, and they challenged that this Symantec antivirus software was being used by Symantec and they were abusing their dominant position. Unfortunately for the complainant, they themselves had said in their application before the CCI that Symantec is fifth in the market share amongst the competitors in India. And that was sufficient for CCI to close the matter. Because if you admittedly say that Symantec holds the fifth position in the market amongst the relevant competitors, the CCI would definitely not initiate an abuse of dominance investigation in that matter. So just to give you the perspective, whether or not it is a digital market or a traditional market, the purpose of the Competition Act, I think, across the jurisdictions, including India, is to see that whenever an enterprise, whether it is traditional or non-traditional, they start their business and exploit the market condition, their objective is to make profit. That is the purpose of doing business. Now, whether that profit is profit or it is profiteering, whether it is a conduct related profit or it is a business related profit, is the nuanced test which the commission, or for that matter, any other antitrust authorities would try to look at. Because in a traditional market, the law has been well established for the last about 100 years plus. But when it comes to the digital market, it's a very new concept. And this new concept needs to be understood with the background by the authorities that the purpose of the business, whether it is traditional or non-traditional, is to make profit. And whether or not this making of profit is going to be detrimental to the other players in the market, including the new entrants who are intending to enter, or even some of the existing players are being driven out because of the conduct or because of the market power. So naturally, to my mind, and perhaps that is the intent of the Indian competition law also, not to really clearly distinguish this concept of a competition assessment between the two markets. However, since the factors relating to the digital markets are very different, naturally, the Competition Commission and its investigator, that is the Office of the DG, also decided to make changes as and when the situation arises, coupled with the fact that the law has provided lot of opportunities for them to maneuver, because the factors are provided in the law in such a manner that they can maneuver within the enactment without really distorting the concept of the competition in the market. Having said that background, I would just like to help the audience out with certain recent examples. Obviously, these are the cases. So from 2015, that Symantec case where the market share was the deciding factor and the matter was closed at the threshold. In a case of a recent origin where the traditional mobile handset sellers, who are typically called the brick and mortar sellers, during the festival season, they were unable to sell off their mobile handset because Amazon and Flipkart, that is the Indian version of the digital market, giant, I would call it now, they were selling those handsets online at a far discounted rate than the brick and mortar sellers who were unable to sell off their handset during that bumper festival season. They bring this to the notice of the CCI that because of their deep pockets and they have got the ability to reach out to people through the digital platform, the general trade, that is the brick and mortar, they were unable to sell off their handsets, which are all replaceable and interchangeable products. And naturally, they alleged that both the Flipkart and Amazon, they were actually trying to dominate the market and abusing that position. So from the time initially, the CCI was reluctant to introduce any investigation into the e-commerce or the digital market on the ground that they constitute the same market with a different distribution channel. Hence, the brick and mortar constituted always a 90% plus market share, and the e-commerce, etc., were comprising between 9 and 5% market share. Hence, the cases were all closed in the initial years. But now, recently, the CCI has found on 13 January 2020 a very interesting issue, that is the mobile handset which is being sold by the general trade, and they allege that Flipkart and Amazon are trying to abuse their dominant position. What CCI has initiated an investigation on this matter, they found that in that relevant market of sale of handsets in the e-commerce platform economy, Amazon constituted about 53% market share, and Amazon 36%, and Flipkart constituted about 53% market share. Though collective abuse of dominance is not part of the Indian Competition Act yet, 53% was considered pretty high, and naturally the CCI wanted an investigation to be initiated. They have not come out with any final order, They agreed at the threshold that yes, there can be a possibility of an abuse of dominance position or exclusivity by the e-commerce platform vis-a-vis the buyers, and in the process the markets are likely to be distorted unless an investigation is announced. Interestingly, in this investigation, CCI has relied upon something very interesting and which I think would be very relevant for our discussion today. So when EU regulation of 20th June 2019 was discussed about, the European Parliament had come out with this regulation, that is EU regulation 2019 oblique 1150. One point I have just taken out from that, which says intermediation services in the online sector. And in that, the EU regulation develops this very interesting theory that this is important mainly, that is, intermediation service is important mainly because the growing intermediation of transactions through online intermediation services, fueled by the strong data-driven indirect network effects, leads to an increased dependence of such business users, particularly micro and small medium-sized enterprises, on those services in order for them to reach to consumers. So this is a behavior which has got a superior bargaining power. So this is what I just thought is so relevant for this CCI decision, because this was announced on 20th June 2019 by European Union. And on 8th of January 2020, the CCI has come out with its e-commerce report. And at para 59 of this report, the CCI almost had highlighted almost identical to what the European Union had done it in June of 2019. If I just read out one sentence of it, I think I would be able to drive home what I'm trying to. The intermediary role of the platform allows it to gather all such competitively relevant data as price, sold quantities, demand, etc., pertaining to, inter alia, each product, seller, and geography. Now, this is a very interesting mix of or cooperation of between two very interesting jurisdictions, that is European Union and India. Both are considering the role of intermediary, which is being provided by the platform economy, and that actually helps the owner of the platform to have some better bargaining power over others, and in the process getting a competitive advantage. CCI in this order of 13th January 2020, that is the general trade brick and mortar versus Amazon and Flipkart, they have held that very interestingly at para 16 of that order. I read it. The Commission notes that Flipkart Marketplace and Amazon Marketplace are e-commerce entities. Following a market-based model of e-commerce, they essentially provide online intermediation services to sellers on one side of the consumers, on the other. These platforms, marketplace and the sellers selling on these platforms, operate at different stages of vertical agreement. Now, they have brought that within the exclusionary conduct of the parties who are alleged to have misused the market power. I am taking a very interesting statement, making an interesting statement that there is a convergence, in my view, that the e-commerce report has come out on 8th of January. The CCI's order has come out on 13th of January. The e-commerce report has some semblance of reliance on the EU regulation of June of 2019, and market power as defined under the Competition Act, that market share can be one of the ingredients of market power. They have also relied upon by specifically bringing out 53% and 36% respectively for these two players.
Right.
What I'm saying here is that they are trying to only show that an investigation can be initiated, whether or not that investigation will conclude that there was an abuse or no abuse, but at least the investigation was earlier on not going through. Now the investigation has really started off. And that is a very significant change. And that is what I thought I should share with you. And
Right.
I think besides that, I would be happy to take any questions. I'm stopping here because I have been allocated about 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's very interesting from the looking at the convergence which we have brought out between the EU and the Indian side. Let me bring immediately Victoria in to present his reflections on the questions raised by Victoria. Vikas, immediately over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Navneet. Thank you, Victoria. I would be very brief because I want to have a healthy discussion on this amazing book that Vicky just came up with. So aside from this pandemic that has now become the center of our daily life, we are also living in a new age, new industrial age, which is now famously being termed as Industry 4.0. Now, as Victoria said, there are certain factors, there are certain characteristics of this industry which are unique, like the importance of data, how machines interact with each other. And these fundamental characteristics of this new industrial age are challenging the way we understand law and every aspect of law: privacy, data regulation, data protection, and even competition law and antitrust. So Victoria's book is very refreshing and topical to this end. I won't go as far as saying that all the fundamental tools that we have gathered so far over, a century of experience that we have in antitrust is completely become junk. But we have good reasons, as she points out in her book, to revisit our understanding of fundamentals of competition law, such as market definition. Well, I agree with Victoria that, of course, we have the reasons to look at the relevance of market definition. Does it serve the same purpose as it used to do in brick and mortar economy, or do we have the reasons to tweak it or change it altogether? In this vein, I would just discuss something very interesting and which sort of furthers what Vicky has shared with us. Now, the concept of market definition, basically it's an analytical tool, and you would agree that it has been devised to understand what are the competitive constraints on the market, on the firm, which has been the question of investigation, which is being investigated. What are the firms that compete with it? Now, how do we do that? We focus on substitution, either by sniff test or by product characteristics. But because of the fundamental characteristics of this new market, the substitution comes from the blind corner. You never know. Like in a couple of days, you get new competitor. Even by applying the 4 principles of disruptive innovation, you would not be able to tell who you are going to compete in a week from now. Now, I can give you this example, and I know that most of us will be able to relate to it. This particular webinar that you and we are on, it is now being, it's the platform that we are on is called Webinar Jam. Had we not been on Webinar Jam, I'm sure we would have been on Zoom, right, Navneet? Well,
Yes.
we do respect our privacy, but I don't know how the market will be 15 days from now. You know why? Kind of webinars. And it's easy for Google to come up with these kind of solutions because they have the know-how, they have the data, they have the technology. Now, what I want to share with you is that the new economy, the new firms, they experience solid economies of scope. And because of this, now we have ecosystems. We have Apple, we have Google, we have Amazon in almost all walks of technology. And why does this economies of scope so fundamentally alter the notion of market definition? I share it with you. We have economies of scope in data. So as Vicky shared, once you have gained data, you can do something alternative with the same kind of data. It becomes easy for you to enter in a cognate market, which was perhaps not the case in the bygone days. And even if that was the case, it was not as easy as it is now. Well, imagine, like for more than a month and a half, we are under lockdown. But still there are new products. There's still new advertisements, if you must have noticed watching your television. How is it possible? You're not leaving the comfort of your home. You're not putting your life on peril, but still there is something new that is happening. And the second thing is know-how. Once you have gained know-how working on a particular application, your team can come up with something similar, because we know it right from 70s and 80s from the work on computer chips that know-how in this area experiences economies of scope. And the third aspect is hardware. Even hardware experiences economies of scope. Say, for example, you're Amazon. You already have servers for delivery of goods, etc., in different parts of the world. You can use the very servers to come up in the area of cloud computing. So you see how easy it is for one company to enter into cognate sectors. And that is one of the reasons why we need to think about substitutability. You cannot even apply the notion of potential competition. It's so rapid. And that's why I think that Vicky's book is very topical. And in this book, she has raised very fundamental issues. We might not have answers to all the issues because it is the dynamic situation. It is the dynamic situation that, so that's why we need to be very careful about. From there, I quickly jump to the second aspect, that is multi-sided market. Victoria has already discussed it. She has already shared her views about multi-sided market, and Mr. Manas Chaudhary has shared Indian experience on it. One thing which I would like to share with you is the case of American Express. This is much celebrated case, precisely for the reason that the US judges were brave enough to apply fundamental of economics, and they translated these fundamentals into law. However, what I find problematic and which you would like to ponder upon is that the notion of transaction and non-transaction market, they based their market definition on a particular paper which Pellistrucci et al. Wrote in 2040. And within 4 years of writing this paper became law. And I find it a little troublesome because the way economics translate into law is not exact science. It has to go through a natural progression of timely, maturing. People need to comment on it. People need to criticize on it. But even before we could contest this paper, the Supreme Court of the United States made it into a law. And I have problems with that because in my paper, I have shown that the fundamentals, the reasons that they come up with to classify multi-sided market in transaction and non-transaction, it is not a good classification. Anyway, so the reason why I'm discussing it with you is that we are in a rapid age of technological development, and how it influences law should be very well thought out. Perhaps we don't need to throw away our past experiences. We do not have to rush in, and at the same time, we just can't keep waiting for the markets to tip over, because we know that network effects make the market tippy. And that brings to me the last point. And I'm sorry, I would just say that it is my thought because I don't have any answers. Nobody has any answers to it. Before we come up with the new notions of market definition, we need to be careful about two things. We cast the net too wide. We define the market too broadly. We are prone to commit the type 1 error, over-enforcement. We cast the net too narrowly. We are going to under-enforce the law. So we need to be very careful. And at the same time, of course, we have the new technology, but legal certainty is the cornerstone of any legal regime. Now, it is a big question, and trust me, it is not a philosophical one. What is the extent of legal certainty that you want to compromise in order to be precise so far as market definition is concerned? We would like to think about it, and I would request Victoria to ponder upon it. Thank you so much. Over to you, Navneet.
Right, Vikas, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. And I think let me refer to the poll results. We had thrown a question to the audience: should competition law rely on market definition in digital market? The jury is overwhelmingly in favor of yes, absolutely. 87% people have said yes, absolutely. We should rely, and only 12% people have said no, it cannot be such a reliable measure. But let me draw now the panel's attention to some of the questions which I can see. So there's a question from Nikita Mohapatra, which she's asking if consumer consumption apps fall within the ambit of market of social networking services. It's a very precise question. Who would like to take it up? Vicky, you want to go first?
Consumption apps. Could you maybe give us an example?
I think, like, perhaps Nikita, can I request you to clarify it a bit? But perhaps for the purpose of discussion, I think we can take examples such as WhatsApp or Facebook. These are the popular communication apps which common people use quite regularly. So she's trying to take. one example and trying to see if they fall in the ambit of market for social networking services? I know it's not an easy question, but nevertheless, I think you can articulate the principles at least.
So I think so social networking services would be more like Facebook and LinkedIn for professionals and so on. But I think there's a really important connection with those consumer communication apps, because as we try to show, you have those platforms that are going into several markets. And Facebook now owns WhatsApp, which is one of the very much used communication apps in Europe. And elsewhere as well. So there's those overlaps, and some of the market sides are really nearly identical, others are not. So then you really have to ask, are they part of the same market or not? And in some instances you might say yes, and in others you might say no. So that's precisely the difficulty of the question, yeah.
Manas, do you want to reflect on that question quickly?
I would just say about a lawyer's perspective, because it would be difficult to justify before an authority as to what we are trying to ascertain, depending on which side I am. If suppose I am defending WhatsApp and Facebook, on the facts of the issue, I will be having my own way of articulating my arguments. But if I am on the side of the complainant, then of course my theory changes. But the basic point remains that we have to define a market, because both WhatsApp and Facebook are business. We cannot say that they are not business. And Competition Act all over the world is try to ascertain market failures arising out of business. So if it is definitely causing some kind of a distortion in the market, I am still keeping the relevant market definition open in this question. But once that has been ascertained, I would try to see whether there is a distortion happening because of the allegation. And
Right.
it would all depend on facts of the allegation.
No, that's a very important observation, that ultimately there is a market distortion happening, and we are talking about a real business and not really a fictitious business. So that's a very
Absolutely.
fundamental aspect to be kept in sight. Vikas, your reflection very quickly on that question before we proceed to the next one.
Well, there can't be a general answer to that. Well, of course, you can say that perhaps they all fall in the category of attention markets. Perhaps they do not. The question is that whether you find them substitutable or not. So I would like to have more concrete examples so that you can gauge substitutability.
Right. All right. So the next question is from Filippo Lansiri, and that's precisely targeted at Professor Robertson. And your view on the SCOTUS MX decision is being sought. Are you comfortable reflecting quickly on that?
Sure, great. So thank you, Philippe, for that question. So I think that the Supreme Court did something that we were all trying to do, and that is to understand how we have to delineate those platform markets. In that case, for the credit cards, but you can also look at it for other platforms as well. And that's what we're doing now. We're looking at Amex for digital platforms, really. Now, I think that very much links back to what I said about the two functions of market definition. The one is the market power function. And to say here that to have this very straightforward in or out market definition decision is very difficult. On the other hand, for the market characterization, it can be very useful. So I think the Supreme Court really looked more at market characterization, but the effect it had was then more of the other one. So obviously the jury is out whether other countries will adopt that as well. As I said, in Europe, we actually had the Court of Justice looking at it from another angle.
Right. So I hope that gives you some clarity, Filippo. And Nikita has now provided a follow-up in the context of WhatsApp and Facebook merger. So I think we have now already had our discussion. Abkita Dhawan's question is the SNP test adequate in helping delineation of markets in digital economies? Are non-price factors important in market definition? If yes, which non-price factors are important and how can they be quantified? Vikas, can I have you first on this?
Yeah, why not? Why not? Like, I give you one example. A question to all of us. Do you find Facebook as relevant as it used to be 5 years back? Of late, ever since we were locked down, I got back on Facebook and I started using it. And I found it like totally useless. It was full of advertisements. And whereas 5 years back, there wouldn't be as many advertisements as there are now. So there is one particular thesis which says that instead, because these are free products, like as Victoria mentions in her book, these are freemium products, free products, you cannot carry out a snip test. So how about carrying out a snip test on the number of advertisements? Like you increase the number of advertisements, do people switch to other platforms? So this could be one way to get substitutability. And this is a very unique way, and there are more than one academics who have advised this sort of tests.
Right. Manas, you want to reflect on the non-price factors, please?
See, I again go back to my own concept about competition law. It's all about conduct, because whosoever owns, either it is a traditional or a non-traditional market, what ultimately is the conduct and what is the intent of that conduct. If we are able to make these two things join together to see whether that conduct coupled with the intent is causing some distortion, even with regard to barriers, whether it is entry or exit. And as Vikas has been harping on substitutability, that's also the third factor. It's so facts driven that I need to really assess which fact I should take to understand what's the problem is in this allegation. If we are able to join the dots, I think, yes, it can be. I'm only talking about as a lawyer that whether or not it would trigger investigation. If it doesn't trigger investigation, then so be it. It's a very nice business. But if it triggers an investigation, it's really a problem. So we have to understand what we are trying to achieve out of this conduct. If this conduct is fair conduct, so be it. If it is unfair conduct, it has to be investigated. So in order to join the dots, my only concern is that what is the intent, what is the conduct, and who are we targeting to march over by gaining market share? If at all we intend to do so, are we really able to do that? If we are gaining market share fairly, it's nothing anti-competitive at all. So if we are doing all of that, depending on the facts which we are trying to assess, I think there can be either an investigation or there would be no investigation. I am just trying to keep the things so simple because it's a complicated market. It is not a normal brick and mortar that, well, I am restricting my production for N number of hours so as to create an artificial demand in the market, and I'll raise the price. I'll collude with my competitors. I'll create an artificial scarcity. It would not happen in this market. So naturally, we have to be really careful about what we are trying to achieve out of these allegations.
Right. And the next question to Professor Robertson. What is your opinion? It's a question from Nobi. Firstly, thank you, Nobi, for your help directly on providing that reference. So, Professor Robertson, what's your opinion on the direct determination of monopoly power rather than going through the procedure of defining the market first in dynamic digital markets?
So I think that's a really relevant question. And that links back to the very first quote that I brought from Louis Kaplow, because he suggests that we don't need to define markets. Now, I think those are two separate issues. Do we need market definition, and how do we arrive at market power for competition law purposes? For the market power aspect of it, I think there will be other instruments. There already are some instruments to directly gauge market power without going through market definition and market shares, because they're very volatile in digital markets. So there will be other tools. But that's for the market power function of the market definition. For the market characterization function, I think there cannot be a substitute. So that will be something that we need to keep in mind. But that's also an area where we will not have so many errors, like Vika said, of over or under enforcement. Because if we have market characterization, it has a different function than market power assessment.
Right. And next question from Anna Pilmas is also to you. What are your views on the suggestion of the special advisor's report that less focus should be placed on the definition of relevant markets in the digital sector?
So here, maybe I should elaborate just for a minute or two on what this advisor's report is. So the European Commission commissioned three scholars to develop a report on how competition policy should play out or should be changed, perhaps, in the digital era. And it was published a bit over a year ago. And in that report, as Anna says, the three special advisors say, well, we should place less emphasis on market definition. Now, as you can probably imagine, I'm a bit skeptical about that. I think when it comes to the market power function, yes, we should probably look at other tools. When it comes to the market characterization function, as I said before, there's no real substitute. So I think we need to look at nuances here. And I do believe that what they also meant probably was the market power function.
Right. I think we have also exhausted our time. Let me request three of you to be in the shoes of a future teller and crystal gaze on the future direction of market definition as to how it is likely to proceed in the next 5 years. As Vikas very rightly said, the machine learning driven, the digital or the artificial intelligence driven business is going to take only deeper roots. The business models are also expected to evolve much further what they are today. So how in this overall fast evolving space, what are the new challenges, and what shape do we see of this particular discussion, what we are carrying out today of market definition in digital space, your projection for next 5 years, starting with you, Victoria?
So that's a really interesting question, especially because sometimes we competition lawyers say that market definition is a bit like trying to predict the future, especially in mergers. But I think, let me just make 2 points. The first is that in digital markets, I do think we will see an increased focus on market characterization and an even bigger realization that describing market power through market definition has definite limits in digital markets. And the second thing is that I'm looking forward to, in 5 years, I hope we will have a new market definition notice for digital markets in the European Union, which I think can really help us have not just a European, but a global discussion, as we're having today, on what relevant markets could look like, how we can define them for competition law purposes, and also how we can find agreement in that.
That's a fairly clear verdict I can see from you. Vikas, over to you. What is your prediction as a competition astrologer?
Well, unlike astrologers, we learn from the past, which is a good thing with human beings. So I would say that this 1997 notice, why it was such a tremendous success, because it was phenomenally simple. And simplicity has its own beauty. Because we know it, Mr. Chaudhary can tell us better than I can, that competition agencies are specialist bodies, but eventually you have to defend your case before judges. And judges are more often than not generalist. So far as the future is concerned, I would just point out 3 things. Any methodology, any new methodology perhaps to devise market definition should have 3 parameters. Accuracy, it should be accurate. Second, the certainty. Legal certainty should not just be thrown out of the window just by arguing that there should be a case-to-case analysis. Even now, we already have econometric tools to gauge market power without defining relevant market, but they are not being employed because for the reason that they do not bring in legal certainty. Third is viability. We should have enough data. It should not put the already cash-strapped regulatory bodies under financial constraints. So when we have these 3 things, we can make a legal tool successful for the future. Thank you.
Right. Market definition 2025. Last word to you, Manas Chaudhary.
Very interesting question, because we are at the threshold of having a new competition amendment bill pending before the parliament. That has, for the context of today's discussion, 2 very interesting amendments have been suggested by government, but because for this lockdown and the parliament not functional, it could not see the light of the day. The 2 interesting departures which the amendment bill is trying to ascertain, and if at all it is passed by Parliament, it would be very dynamic change. One, that they are trying to bring in a different threshold for digital market with regard to the merger country. So there can be a possibility of a deal value test instead of a threshold test of turnover and assets. So that would be a dynamic change.
All right. I think on that note, I think he has also been disconnected perhaps because of internet connection. But on that note, let me bring this first session under the e-colloquium to a close. I must place on record our most sincere thanks to Dr. Robertson, Victoria Robertson. Thank you very much for presenting your book and engaging with the discussion. Thank you very much, Vikas, for your time and the discussion. And thank you very much in absentia, Manas Chaudhary, for all the wisdom you brought to the discussion, and to all the people who have attended today's, approximately 150 people have attended today's discussion. Manas, if you're there, I think you can conclude what you wanted to say.
Yeah. So this amendment would bring in some departure. One is that they're trying to introduce hub and spoke kind of a situation where I think artificial intelligence algorithm in digital market would perhaps become more important. At the same time, the balancing factor would be whenever a new technology comes into the market, say for example, a new handset is being introduced by a manufacturer, obviously on that day it may be having 100% market share. But the moment it is being mimicked by a fence sitter, immediately the market share comes down to 50 to 33 to 25. And naturally, this also needs to be understood by the competition agencies. In the technology market, the market share does not stay for a long period of time because it's so dynamic. At the same time, the competition authorities, whenever we look at ICN documents or EU regulations, and to that extent, even the CCI, they're trying to get an assessment as to how the algorithm plays an important role. And with the amendment, which is likely to happen very soon, this would be making a game changer, new game changer for India.
So bubble is the only adjective which comes to my mind. Watch out the bubble. Stay careful about market definition in digital market. Thank you very much, Dr. Victoria Robertson, Mr. Manas Chaudhary, Dr. Vikas Kathuria, and all the participants for attending, making this discussion so lively. We have thoroughly enjoyed your presence and participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, everyone.